Shall we talk about the new football regulator for England that we've been seeing develop? And surprise, surprise, there's already been a fair amount of mission creep. Kick It Out, which is the anti-racist, quote-unquote, group within football, have been protesting because they feel like the regulator, as it's being sketched out, doesn't do enough on the question of DEI. They want, as I understand it, kind of mandatory reporting of diversity in the workplace, as well as various other measures. Chris, you picked this story out. What do you make of this?
It proves everything people like me were saying about the football regulator. So the football regulator, if you recall, was deemed necessary, despite football being arguably the most successful industry in the entire country, because two things were used as excuses. Firstly was the proposed European Super League, which was never actually going to happen because the fans wouldn't have it. Although, Tom, we would have loved it because it would ensure that Spurs would be in the top flight forever, wouldn't it?
Exactly, would have locked us in at just the right time.
Seems to be happening at the moment.
Exactly. If they were doing that European Super League now, we would never get anywhere near it. So I've changed my position on it purely on the basis of that.
Happened at the time, you would have been stuck there as a quote big club forever.
We'd be in the European Super League and in the Championship.
Boris Johnson kicked off about the European Super League to show he's a man of the people. Said, "I'm not going to let this happen. It was never going to happen, and it's not really any business of government anyway." And then you had Bury FC, not United, it's Bury FC, isn't it? They went bust. One of a very, very small number of clubs actually to go bust, but it does happen from time to time. And apparently that's not acceptable in an industry for one business to disappear. So we had the football regulator and the IEA, many others were saying this is going to be a nightmare. It will immediately move on from its core objective and start interfering in all sorts of different ways. And you're going to have the fans supposedly are going to be in charge of how much your ticket prices are, but also how much it spends. And is that really going to be a recipe for good governance? And sure enough, it only was created last summer and already it's embroiled in this EDI thing. So what's it called? Kick It Out, which used to be known as Kick Racism Out of Football, but is now a multi-million-pound company that is involved in advocacy in all sorts of ways. They don't seem to have anything concrete to complain about, actually, because the football regulator hasn't said exactly what its EDI policy is going to be. It has said that equality, diversity, and inclusion is a key element of the Football Governance Act. Why is it? Why is that? Yeah, how does that stop clubs going bust? I don't know. It's nothing to do with having dodgy owners who might put the club in peril. It's just trendy nonsense as far as I'm concerned. And so Kick It Out said, we're concerned that the football regulator is not going far enough on this EDI stuff, I guess, to try and push it in a more interventionist direction. The stats on this are quite interesting. Said that 22% of roles in board and senior leadership teams are women. 0.3% are from LGBTQ plus backgrounds. These are obviously lower than you would expect from the general population, but this is kind of one of the problems with enforcing EDI onto all sorts of different industries, is that you just wouldn't expect these figures to be representative of the general population, because no matter how much the BBC tries to ram women's football down our throats, the fact of the matter is that men are much more likely to be keen on football than women are, and you need to look at the crowds to see that very, very, very clearly. There's a huge gender imbalance amongst people who actually like and watch and go to football. So it's hardly surprising that that's going to be reflected in the board and obviously on the pitch, right? This is men's football we're talking about primarily. And it's always been a bit of a surprise why there aren't more black people in particular sort of on the boards of things, and there's not as many managers as you might expect, although obviously that is changing. But on the pitch, clearly there is a huge overrepresentation of people from ethnically diverse background, black players in particular, and they're the ones who made the money. Football is an unusual industry in that respect. It's not the people on the board, Jerry, who are making the highest salaries out of it. But of course, they have to kind of put that to one side the EDI people on this particular occasion, because what you've actually got is incredibly rich players, a disproportionate number of whom are from ethnically diverse backgrounds. And so they focus on the board instead, which is, why would you particularly expect the board to be 40% women? And there's a broader angle to this, of course, which is that this stuff is being imposed on boards of any large organization now. And so companies, if they want to list on the London Stock Exchange, have to have at least 40% of women on the board, and have to a woman being at least one of the very senior board positions. And this seems to actually be having a tangible effect on the number of companies that are listing, because they just go, sod this, why should we go through all these stupid hoops? Well, we could list in New York anyway, which has various other advantages. So this stuff should never be part of the Football Governance Act. There shouldn't be a football regulator anyway. And if there has to be a football regulator, it should be purely looking at whether, football clubs are financially viable and the people who own them are not criminals.
What do you make of this, Josie, and this bizarre mindset that we're still stuck with, which is that if there's not perfect representation in any setting, something must be wrong and something must be done?
Yeah, I think in France a few years ago, there was a secret quota for white players for the national team. Because there weren't any. That's obviously not because there was discrimination against white players. They just weren't very good white players because they were playing tennis and rugby. And, so I think that's sort of social life. Different groups have different cultures and different preferences. And that means that certain people are channeled towards some things and others towards other things. And I think that this kind of idea that you need to absolutely represent the demographics of every community and every institution is bizarre. And I think it's really about institutions being accountable to committees and not to their mission or their audience, because what the public sector equality duty, a lot of it is about publishing your statistics, publishing your report on time, monitoring everything. It's that kind of documentation. It's like saying, like most institutions, when you're saying what should we be doing, you're like, well, how do we do our job as well as possible and please the people who follow us, right? That's the kind of thing. But this is really saying, actually, how do we please a committee, and how do we show them that we're representative, which is a kind of tick box thing, and that's to do with various sort of protected characteristics as well, which are sort of plucked out the air. You could choose lots of other things. I mean, class isn't mentioned, for example. But it's like they've decided on these certain protected characteristics, and then the population has to be divided up in terms of those characteristics, which are not things that people identify with necessarily. And then that has to be mapped exactly onto every institution at every level, even though there are lots of reasons why people might choose to go into one area or another. And so it's that kind of very, it's bureaucracy, it's representation, is bureaucracy's idea of what representation means, which is not actually what it really means to represent people. I think if you get rid of discrimination, that's it, right? If you're just playing the best players, taking the best managers, taking the best coaches, whatever their background, that's what you want. That's the dream. That's always been the dream since the French Revolution. It's like that's what equality is not discriminating. If you don't discriminate, that's what you need to do. You don't need to. And this is not about not discriminating. This is actually about constantly discriminating and dividing people up into these boxes which they may not identify with, and then kind of meddling with institutions to represent these boxes that you've just created, and discriminating, right? So that would be saying that we actually don't want a man for the job, or we don't want a white person for the job, or in France they want more white people, or whatever, right? So it's actually about embedding that discrimination as a systematic thing and as a bureaucratic committee-led thing, which is as bad as social discrimination. That's not the dream. That's not the way you want it. What you want is for everyone to be thinking about what they're doing and not who somebody is, right? To think about the football and not to think about the background.
Absolutely.
And actually, sport is pretty effective in that, because because at the end of the day, you pick the person who can help you win. Like if you discriminate, you're going to lose because you're going to pick someone who's not as good. And so I say, well, sport is one of the areas where really it doesn't really matter. It's just how good are you with the ball? That's it. Or how good are you as a coach? And you would always want to pick the best person. And so you've got actually an industry it's really very kind of, pretty good in that respect. And then they're just trying to embed all this rubbish on it.
And do you think there'll be any more rubbish that's embedded into all this, Chris? Are we going to see net zero stuff, public health stuff? It's just the inevitable creep of projects like this.
Yeah, I think we'll see stuff on those two issues specifically and many more. But it's just become almost immediately just another part of the blob. It will expand its reach. It will find reasons to create new departments for this and that, as indeed kick it out has. And it ultimately will work in its own interests as a part of the bureaucracy to keep itself relevant by finding new things to do. And every time there's any kind of issue that's all about football in the news, the government say we are going to give more money to the football regulator who can deal with this issue and deal with that issue. And ultimately, it will make things worse. It will damage. It will damage the game, I think. And there's absolutely no chance of the regulator under its EDI remit saying we're going to do more to get more white people into the Premiership on the pitch. I mean, which is really where the main financial inequality is. The thing with football is that if you're at all into it, you can see who's good and who's bad. You can't always see that on boards. That's the thing, and that's why there's various ways that companies actually get around these kind of regulations, which aren't particularly good. In fact, often are counterproductive. I mean, one way is if you need to have one woman on the senior leadership, like those 3 or 4 people right at the top. Often they can be sort of nominal figures, really, right? And so you just get the same 2 or 3. You just get Shami Chakrabarti as on the board of every company going, because they don't actually need to turn up, maybe do 1 hour, 1 day a month or something like that. In fact, Kick It Out itself has its own special anti-Islamophobia department, right? And guess who runs that? Baroness Varsi. I bet Baroness Varsi is on the boards of loads of different organizations, purely to kind of tick that box. The other way they can get around this, somebody told me quite recently, is in order to get your overall gender wage more balanced, is you just employ more men at the lower level, which effectively means you don't employ women in kind of starting positions to make sure that your lowest paid people are all men. That's not really creating, well, it is creating more equality in a way, but only by denying opportunities to women to work for you in the first place. So there's all sorts of unintended consequences with this stuff when companies are forced to do something that they don't want to do and they don't think is actually good for their business. In order to make the numbers add up, there's all sorts of ways actually they can get around this. They're not helping anyone, in fact, harming people.